I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of custodians, rather, of the place where I'm at today, and that is the people of the Wadawurrung Nation. So obviously we're all in different locations today, being virtual, and so by all means jump onto the chat and acknowledge the traditional custodians of where you are if you'd like. Normally Melbourne Connect would of course be with the people of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and we hope to get back there soon. So Melbourne Connect, if you don't know what Melbourne Connect is Australia's newest innovation precinct, where we aim to connect people and drive innovation. And we do that by having a host of different partners all co-located at the precinct. We have university partners there, of which we're going to meet tonight from the Faculty of Engineering and IT. But we've got industry partners and government partners, and we all get together in this space to try and grow our various businesses via collaboration and connection. So we do that. One of the ways that we do that is through this series of activities and events. So first of all, I'm just going to show how interactive these virtual events can be. I'm going to pop a poll on the screen, and I'm going to ask how you're joining us tonight and why you're joining us tonight. Feel free to fill that out while you're hearing my introduction. But that's about all I need to say, because I'm going to introduce the host of today's session. And the host we're very, very lucky to have with us tonight is Professor Frank Vettieri. So Professor Frank Vettieri is the Deputy Dean of the faculty that we were just talking about, the Faculty of Engineering and IT, and he's a professor at the Human-Computer Interaction, which is one of the schools of computing and information systems. So Frank is a very, very knowledgeable professor, and we're very lucky to have him tonight. So feel free to join me on the stage whenever you like, Frank. So as Frank joins us, and I'll hand over to him very soon. Thanks for joining us, Professor. I'll tell you very, very quickly about the Q&A, folks. So we're going to leave the Q&A open for the entire session. We're going to try and make it as engaging as possible and as interactive as possible. So feel free to pop any questions that you have as you go along. Frank's going to keep an eye on that and answer them as we go. And if we can't get to them, we'll get to them at the end. But by all means, don't save your questions. Put them in there now, and we'll approach them. So thanks very much. And after that staccato start, I might throw to you, Frank. And once again, thank you for hosting today's session.
Thanks, Tim, and thank you for the introduction. And I'm really looking forward to this conversation with Marcello. I too would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of whatever lands we are all in. So great for you to be here. And just before we start, I'd just like to reiterate Tim's comments. I've got a series of questions that I'd like to get through with Marcello, but I'm very happy to be redirected to others depending on where the Q&A takes us. So please feel free to add your questions as we go through. Today, I'm hosting a conversation with Marcello. I'm really pleased. Marcello is a professor of information systems here at the University of Melbourne. He works in the area of process mining and business process management, and he leads our information systems group in the School of Computing and Information Systems. He also happens to be the CEO and the co-founder of Apromore, and that's going to be an important topic of conversations for us. So Apromore is a spin-off of the University of Melbourne, and as he puts it, it aims to democratize process mining through the development of software, of this software system called Apromore. And it's open source software, and it's a software for process analytics. There's a huge history that's led up to Apromore, and we'll hope to cover some of that as we go in the conversation. So Marcello, welcome. It's great having you here. Might start, Marcello, by asking you a question about allowing you to give a little bit of your own history about what's led you to be a professor of information systems here at the University of Melbourne.
Thank you, Frank, and thank you also to Tim and Melissa for this invite. It's great to be here, and it's great with Apromore to be part of this vibrant ecosystem that is Melbourne Connect. So, Frank, as you said, I'm a professor of information systems, and I've been working more specifically in the areas of business process management and process mining pretty much throughout my academic career. I started with a PhD in the area of business process management at the Queensland University of Technology, after a degree in software and systems engineering that I got in Italy. And after the PhD, I decided to undertake the academic career. So I just went through the various steps in the ladder until I became a professor in 2014. Then I relocated to Melbourne Uni with my team. We were about 12 people back then, from the sunny Brisbane to the metropolitan vibe of Melbourne at the beginning of 2018. And I've been working there as a professor and leader of the information system group since then.
Great, and you're able to access real Italian food now that you're right in Melbourne as well. So lovely for you to be here.
Absolutely.
Marcello, I might ask by kicking us off by asking you to explain process mining. And what is it? Is it just the application of traditional computer science in a business context? Is it something that you know, it's just applied computer science or something else? What's so special about process mining?
So my background, as I said, is in software and systems engineering. My PhD was in IT. So my take on process mining has mostly been in the past from a technological viewpoint. However, process mining as a discipline really sits across data science on the one end and process science or business process management on the other side. So it is pretty much exposed to the business side of the equation as well. So the idea of process mining is to enable organizations to achieve digital transparency. Everything that we do these days is done on top of some system. Take the University of Melbourne, take one of our core processes, the student admission, that runs on top of a system called Student One. So the idea of process mining is to enable analysts and stakeholders of this process, like a student admission manager, to gain insights into how this process really works. So how do we really perform student admission throughout the year, including different student cohorts, including across different faculties, across different periods, like Semester 1, Semester 2 intake, and so on. So how we go about that with process mining? Because the idea is that if we gain this digital transparency, then we can use these insights as a starting point to understand where there are frictions in this process, where the process breaks down, where there are reworks, repetitions, bottlenecks, where we violate some policy, some compliance rule, and so use these insights as a starting point to implement improvements, interventions that can help us meet or exceed our key performance indicators. Now, traditionally, within the area of business process management, we would go through a manual approach. We would interview stakeholders involved in this process, like the admin officers that work in the student admission process. We would interview students, we would interview managers, and try to stitch together these different pieces of the puzzle to build a picture of this process. However, as you can imagine, this traditional method is error-prone and quite time-consuming, and it is also skewed or biased by the people that we engage in the conversation, their particular viewpoint. You know, certain people would be exposed to certain portions of this end-to-end business process. So reconstructing an unbiased view of the process to use as a starting point for our analysis could be daunting and might not necessarily lead to a faithful representation of reality. However, as organizations have evolved and digitized their operations more and more, everything one way or another is supported by an application or a system. And these systems leave a digital footprint of the processes they support. So the idea of process mining is to tap into this digital footprint and reverse engineer the underlying processes that are performed on top of these systems the data comes from. So we can automatically build a flowchart, like a graphical representation in the form of a graph of this process, and automatically identify performance and compliance issues, like highlight bottlenecks, highlight rework and repetition, over-processing waste, non-compliance issues, resources that underperform, as well as resources that are underutilized. And then process mining takes us one step forward by using all these insights that we collect to simulate different interventions. basically to simulate different what-if scenarios. What if I parallelize these two activities? What if I remove this check? What if I replace this human activity, this manual activity, with a software code? So that we can understand the impact of these interventions before we go out and implement them. We can select the most promising one on the basis of a cost-benefit analysis and then implement change to achieve higher level of performance and compliance of these processes. So you can see process mining, in short, as a data-driven approach to business process management, where data is the starting point to analyze our organization using a business process lens.
That's a great explanation. Thank you for a thorough explanation of process mining. Could you give an account of where the field is at the moment internationally, and the degree to which these ideas are being appropriated and adopted by businesses both in Australia and internationally?
So process mining, I really fell in love with this topic because it actually started from academia. It started in the early 2000s and was pushed forward by Professor van der Aalst from the Technical University of Eindhoven in the Netherlands. So what I mean is that now it has been applied in a large number of organizations in different sectors. There is about Gartner accounts about 25 representative vendors, of course, including Apromore, vendors of process mining software. But the discipline is well grounded on solid foundations, because these foundations originate from an academic effort. So when I started my PhD in 2005, process mining was pretty much in its infancy. We were building the very first algorithms to reverse engineer a graph. Back then it was a Petri net, a very a formal representation of a graph, of a process, using transactional data as input. But pretty much there was no market there. And it was really the push of the academic community that helped the discipline take off, to the point that now there is a predicted annual compound growth rate of over 70%. So the market for process mining is really growing very, very rapidly. Given the origins in academia in the heart of Europe, as of today, the process mining market is most developed in Europe. Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, now also the UK. These are the countries where you've seen a number of deployments of process mining solutions, and where process mining has concretely helped achieve some interesting ROIs in the order of dozens and dozens of millions of dollars. United States and Canada are now following suit, as well as Oceania and especially Australia. So compared to Europe, we are a few years back, if you wish, here in Australia. But now we've seen that after the big hit that COVID had on the economy, as the economy is recovering, we see more and more organizations, large but also mid-sized ones, getting interested in process mining, putting out requests for quotations, getting out tenders to start a process mining initiative.
Okay, so it sounds like we're at the beginning of something quite large, and it's growing significantly around the world. We've got a question from Phil, and I do want to take questions from the audience, and that's, how do you account for non-digital manual type processes? Because you described a quite effective way of documenting or accounting for the digital ones, but what about the manual ones that don't leave a digital trace?
So there are two types of manual activities as part of, let's say, an end-to-end process. The first type is an activity that might not run on top of an enterprise system, like Student One in the case of Melbourne Uni for the student admission process, or it could be SAP for your order-to-cash process, or Salesforce for your lead-to-quote process, right? There are activities, however, that run on top of applications. So they are manual in the sense that they are not part of an overarching system, but they are still run on top of some, computer. So they are still they still run on top of some applications. This could be, in the context of the student admission process, could be a professional staff transferring student records from an Excel spreadsheet to a web form. So data transfers or handling an approval over email. So while it is not a system, there are applications indeed that are used, and these applications also log or can be used with specialized software called task mining software to actually log what we call user interaction logs. That is, record the interactions that the user, like the professional staff in the context of this task in the student admission process, performs on top of some desktop applications. And then we can use these UI logs and feed them into the process logs that we've obtained from the system, like student one, to actually allow us to see within each task of the process. So the task could be, for example, transfer student records. So the task mining approach would allow us to see within this task and reconstruct the routine that the user has followed to perform this operation. The second type of manual task is the one that really happens outside of any system or desktop application. So what we do is, in this case, we follow a hybrid approach where we combine process and task mining on the one end with the more traditional discovery methods from BPM. So basically, you discover these missing bits that are entirely performed manually by running interviews, engaging stakeholders in workshops, or observing how they work in reality. But these days, the extent of these entirely manual tasks keeps shrinking over and over as we become more and more digitized.
Okay, great. So there's so we've got a little bit of your background, and we've got a good understanding of what process mining is and the growing impact internationally. But you've done something particularly unique, and you've not just sat in academia. You've started a company and started Apromore. So I just want to ask you that moment or that transition to make a decision to the pathway to Apromore. And as I said, when did you stop looking at the citation index and start looking at the business indexes? And so how did that come about, and what was your thinking around that, and why did you feel that was an important thing to do?
So let me take a step back from the time we spun out from Melbourne Uni, and let me go back 10 years before then. So in 2009, when the Apromore initiative actually started. It started as a research project in cooperation with the Technical University of Eindhoven, which I visited in the European summer of 2009. I was fresh out of my PhD, and I started working into this project called Apromore. You probably know the Dutch really love acronyms. You can see that in their names, they've got many initials, and they came up with this nice acronym, Apromore, for a project funded by NWO, the equivalent of the ARC in the Netherlands. And back then, this acronym meant Advanced Process Model Repository. So basically, I was invited by this professor that I mentioned before, Wil van der Aalst, to start working into a process analytics platform. And of course, we needed first to start by conceptualizing this idea, defining the software architecture, and starting building the key algorithms that will allow us to then generate this analytics. So the project evolved over time. When I came back to Australia, then I started leveraging off this idea to attract funds. So we got a couple of ARC projects, a CRC project, then some funds from Data61, back then it was called NICTA. And basically we started building this research prototype, Apromore, as a platform to display our own research ideas in the area of process modeling first and process mining afterwards. And pretty much the platform evolved as our research interest and our own research outputs and research outcomes evolved. And for about 10 years, it served its purpose. It helped us gain traction in academia in the form of grants, right? Because it was easy to showcase our own ideas through this tangible platform, right, that people could play with. And that's why also you mentioned before open source. We chose open source because it allowed us basically to build something that others could leverage and build on top of to showcase their ideas and collectively advance the state of the art in process mining. But then through Apromore, we started delivering consultancy services in process mining. I did several projects through the University of Melbourne for organizations both in Europe and in Australia. And we were using the software, this time not anymore to display our research outcomes, but rather as a concrete tool to deliver the consultancy, so to help organizations gain a digital transparency, improve their performance for operational excellence. And so we started building some features that would help us, like wearing an analyst hat, make our life easier. And it was then that we found that the organizations that we were using the software with in the context of these projects had an appetite for the project. They started asking, hey, what about the tool that you're using? Can we actually use it ourselves? You run the project, but could we, take over? We would like to learn to walk with our own legs. And at the same time, the process mining market was getting more and more mature. There were all these analysts that were talking about, I mean analysts like software and technology analysts like Gartner, Forrester, HFS, Everest, that were talking about process mining as an area, as a technology that was picking up, following suit from the recent trends around automation, robotic process automation, etc. So we thought that the time was ripe to commercialize Apromore. And it was then that I approached my head of school, Uwe Eikelin. We also had a number of chats, Frank, and I approached Mark Cassidy, our dean, and I received strong support and encouragement from them to explore this commercialization path. And it was thanks to that strong support that I felt, I was backed up on that, and I decided to venture into this new activity. I've always had an inclination for the entrepreneurial side of academia. I've been leading a professional training arm of our university focused on BPM. And as I mentioned just before, I've been delivering consultancy services using our own research with industry. So I've always been exposed to that side, and the discipline of process mining lends itself very well to that it sort of felt natural to take that extra step and commercialize Apromore.
I'm not quite sure whether Uwe and Mark convinced you, or they convinced, whether they convinced you or you convinced them. But let's assume that you worked together, whether you needed to be pushed across. But it sounds like there would have been some interesting conversation around the open source nature of the software, and trying to convince your colleagues and others that there is a business to be had around open source software, and how the clients come to attract them. So this is a response to a question that's in the chat here. How do you convince both your colleagues and your clients around an open source business model? Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
So the open source business model, of course, is not new. It's actually quite established in IT, and there are organizations that have basically achieved great levels of success thanks to an open source business model. Think of Red Hat that a few years back was acquired by IBM for several $1 billion. So you can clearly monetize from open source, but you need to find the right angle to do that. And that angle may change from discipline to discipline. So what we did with Apromore was to build a freemium model, where basically the core of Apromore has been and will always remain open source. And that is for the benefit of multiple communities. We have a number of universities in the world that use Apromore in their teaching of BPM and process mining subjects. So there are entire cohorts of students from South America all the way to Japan that use our software for academic purposes. That also links to research. It serves as a platform for academics to build on. But when it comes to industry, basically what we are experiencing is that organizations test Apromore on their own, and they approach us maybe after a year or a few months that have been using it. They have now proven the value, and they are ready to take the next step. Now, if you want to use a software in production, either you have a technical team that can really master that software and provide maintenance and support in-house, which if you look at a software that is complex like Apromore, is not something that everyone would do. Or you rely on a company that provides this maintenance and support services under a commercial model. And that's what we followed with Apromore. So we have an enterprise edition, which sits on top of Apromore core. And first, we use the enterprise edition to provide services upon. So we offer that as a SaaS model on the cloud, or we install it on premises on the client's infrastructure. We provide support through upgrades, maintenance, and also we have a series of add-ons that are only extra modules that you can add on top of Apromore that are only available in the Enterprise Edition. For example, we have an entire integration center that allows organizations to connect with different systems to source data from. For example, SAP, Salesforce, ServiceNow, systems like this for which we have dedicated connectors. We also have an editor for analysts to define ETL pipelines, so to define data ingestion pipelines, a performance dashboard, the ability to connect to your identity manager, like single sign-on. These are all add-ons that are interesting and add value from a commercial viewpoint only in an enterprise setting. So when you need to use the software for production. And this model has been working quite well for us. Of course, being part of the open source community, it's a give and take. So you contribute, but you also receive from the community, right? Bug fixing, free testing, right? So there's an entire community that help us test the software, report bugs, and so on.
So there's been a question posted about how the business model, the interplay between the business model and the product that you developed, and it sounds like there's been a strong interplay between the two of them. So there's a way, if I'm understanding you correctly, that business model helps you to refine and redevelop the software itself.
Absolutely. So it helps us mostly in testing the software. It helps us to promote the software and make it, raise our awareness of the software on a global scale. And eventually, some of these engagements lead to commercial engagements. And that is one channel that we use. It's clearly not the only one. We also have marketing, like outbound marketing activities, inbound marketing conversion activities. It's funny because 2 years ago, I knew nothing about all of this. And this is part of the learning curve.
So just continuing that learning curve, and part of the entrepreneurial process is seeking investors and seeking others. And it's wonderful that you had the support of the head of school and the dean and the university, but ultimately you do need the contribution of investors and significant investors to move forward. Can you talk a little bit about that process of reaching out for and connecting with investors and encourage and how that came to be of getting some major investment in your company, and how the company ended up being structured as a result of that.
So we realized that given that the process mining discipline had already been around for about 15 years, when we decided to, 15, 17 years, when we decided to spin out and commercialize Apromore, we realized that we needed to raise funds in order to be able to become competitive in the commercial environment in a very short time frame. So we started looking for investors. And one thing that worked out for us was not to go through the usual path of venture capitalist, but rather to look for investors who would have a skin in the game. So our lead investor is a leading BPM software vendor based in Germany called GBTech, and they provide a BPM platform. So they have a tool for process modeling, one for process automation, and the bit that was missing was process mining. So we engaged with them because we saw an opportunity to collaborate besides the investment through a strategic partnership. So now Apromore is also offered OEM as part of GBTech's tool suite. And then there are a couple of consultancy companies that are involved as investors, as minor investors, and they also have a skin in the game because they offer process mining consultancy services. So they have naturally become reseller and value-adding partners. So basically they resell our software on behalf of Apromore, and they add value-adding services on top of this, such as their consultancy services, their training and technical support services. The fourth investor is the University of Melbourne. The university invested financially, but they also invested through IP transfer. So basically the code, in part open source, the great majority back then was open source code, but also some closed source code that we had developed within Melbourne Uni has now been transferred to Apromore to form the initial goodwill of the company, basically.
Okay, keep going.
Then you also asked about the structure. It is the typical structure of a software company. So our focus is to build a software product. So we have a product development team. We have then a marketing and sales department, and then we have an operations department. Within the product development team, we have software engineers at different levels divided into teams. So we've got a team that focuses on the platform. We've got a team building up that focuses specifically on the integration between Apromore and different systems, like developing connectors. And then we've got what we call the process mining team. Now, that is a strong edge that we have over competitors. We source developers for this process mining team directly from our own PhD school. So as a pathway to industry, some of our PhD students, once they complete their PhD, and so they've been thoroughly trained in the art and science of process mining, they can land a job at Apromore and focus on continuing to develop those algorithms. And it's incredibly hard to find developers that know the process mining field deep inside to be able to come up with new algorithms or re-engineer the existing one. Typically, you only get it through a PhD pathway. And that is also why it is important to remain tightly linked with the university, and also one of the reasons we decided to establish our headquarters at Melbourne Connect. Also, my other co-founder, Marlon Juma, is a professor of information systems at the University of Tartu in Estonia, so that is also another important vehicle for us to recruit PhD graduates in process mining.
So you're maintaining these deep tentacles into accessing talent and growing talent through your ongoing connection with the university.
But also our agenda in terms of product development is directly informed by our own research in process mining. Mm-hmm. So it is basically a trade-off between what's coming up, what's hot in process mining, which we sense from the research, from what's happening in the academic community, and customer demand. Customer demand is more immediate. I need something now. The process mining agenda that is driven by our own research has a 3 to 5 years time frame.
And you mean you've got a team of how many in your team at the moment in Apromore?
We are around 30 people, and last year in June when we raised the Series A, we were only 5. So it's been a very sharp growth in this short time frame.
And you have representations internationally now too?
So the company has basically been built during COVID. So working from home is the norm. And, we founded Apromore in September 2019. And then in March 2020, we were all working from home. We were 5 back then. So we've got people in different locations in Australia. So we've got some senior developers in Brisbane, marketing person in Wollongong, our global marketing director, she's American with a background in business analytics, but she's based in Auckland. And then we've got our European team working close to the University of Tartu, where our co-founder Marlon Juma is. And then we also got someone in the United States. And these days, the location doesn't really matter. So when we open a position, it's Melbourne/work remotely.
So even though it was very much born in a COVID context, you're suggesting much of this distributed work is likely to continue. So can you talk? You've alluded to the connections to the university, but you are situated in Melbourne Connect, and so I guess that offers you some opportunities to be even. It's closer to the research, it's closer to the work. Is that some of the benefits of being at Melbourne Connect explicitly?
Absolutely. I'm still involved with the University of Melbourne, where I am still a professor in the areas of BPM and process mining, though I have switched part-time, and I still lead my BPM team. We are 10 now, and this vicinity, this proximity with the university clearly allows us to keep the bond tight, strong with the research side of the discipline. But also what we found interesting is the innovation ecosystem that is now being built around Melbourne Connect in the innovation precinct of Melbourne, the outskirts of the city and Parkville, from RMIT all the way through to Melbourne Uni. So being part of that ecosystem is important to contribute to building a startup culture here in Australia, or at least in Melbourne. One thing that we've experienced, Frank, is that working for a startup might not be so attractive as working for a large bank or insurance company. As you know, the majority of companies here in Australia are, large insurance groups, large banks, telcos, and resource mining companies, and especially when you look at software engineers, they jump from one company to the other. When you come up with your little 30 people startup, Apromore that no one knows, it might not be so appealing. So I think it all starts with injecting nurturing the right startup culture, the advantages of being part of a company that for once is actually building a software product, not offering services, and being of the right size so that whatever you do in terms of coding, you will see the tangible benefits in your company's client in 3 to 6 months down the track. And that is something that you won't easily experience in a large service company. And I think that this move to Melbourne Connect can help us in that direction. I see the comparison with other vendors in Europe, like in Germany, for example, or in the United States, where the startup culture is much more developed than here in Australia. And of course, we are working from home, so why an office? Why is a physical office and a beautiful one? I think that working from home is great, and we've now realized that we can work very effectively from home, but nothing, in my opinion, replaces face-to-face interactions, the occasional chat, a good Italian espresso, and these are things that you share with people. And having the possibility of sitting together in a nice environment is something that we thought was the right time to have for Apromore as we keep growing. Of course, we are going to keep it very flexible, so there will be an expectation that those who are in Melbourne show up, because we have to justify the rent, but at the same time, people will still be allowed to work remotely, to work from home, and take it easy, so long as we do what we need to do to build a great product.
That's look, I might just ask you, perhaps as the final question, is now that you're in Melbourne Connect and part of the startup ecosystem, have you had an opportunity to connect with some of the other startups in Melbourne Connect? And I know you haven't because of COVID, but has there been anything that you might like to? So to talk about part of that broader ecosystem, and now that you are there and there's an opportunity to connect and grow, and any benefits that you might anticipate or you might have experienced so far?
So besides, as I said, the great location, because the building is wonderful, ultra modern, there are a number of events that Melbourne Connect is organizing, and we have been invited in all these events, like the Innovation Week or the Fireside Chat or Know Your Neighbor type of events. Or the startup, there are some events organized for students where they can get to know the local startups. So I think these are wonderful opportunities to start building relationships with other fellow founders and other startups around Melbourne Connect. Of course, we have all been working from home, so things have not been as easy as expected. And now our office is complete, and we are looking forward to moving in as soon as the restrictions are lifted. So hopefully in a month or two, we'll be able to start utilizing that space.
Now, I know I said that was the last question, but I'll just give you one more. And there's any advice you'd give to academics who might be thinking around commercializing their idea and exploring startups? What sort of is there one little gem, one little jewel you might like to land on their table?
So for us, what worked well was to have a very mature idea. And that idea became mature because we tested it with a number of different audiences. Of course, your fellow academics are, the most immediate interlocutor for this type of evaluation, but then you bridge across to industry people, to professionals in different sectors, so that you can start refining that idea, eventually leading to a business model. The second thing that I think is really working well for us is that, yes, we are a young startup, but you have to admit that you are ignorant in anything else than your academic focus. That is my case. So I know nothing about marketing, I know nothing about sales, I know nothing about product management, for that sake. So you can start by building a startup from the ground up, by getting surrounded by young graduates and people who are very energetic and very excited to prove their skills, and that is totally fine. But there is also another option, to be perhaps more selective, more focused, hire less, but hire very experienced people in key roles. Our global sales director has 30 years of experience in sales of software, including process mining and BPM software. The same goes with our pre-sales director. As I mentioned before, our global marketing director has experience in business analytics software. She knows very well the North American market, where she comes from. And I think that eventually they are helping us take the company from a garage startup to an enterprise level, enterprise grade organization. So there are some key roles where you need to have the right people, and then they can drive the hire. They can drive recruitment in their own areas of expertise, like junior salespeople, junior pre-sales consultant, marketing specialists, and so on.
Great. Look, that's a great way to end. I know there's one question in the Q&A, but I think you answered that earlier, so that's why I didn't address that entirely. Thank you very, very much, Marcello. I'm delighted to have this chat, and looking forward to you growing and becoming enormously successful at Melbourne Connect. So I'll hand it back over to Tim.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Frank, and thanks very much, Marcello, as well. Look, honestly, it was very moving to hear some of the things that you were saying, and how you what you look forward to Melbourne Connect to try and facilitate your next stages of growth and connections with people, and thrilled to hear that there's a few opportunities coming up that might do that. For any other partners that might be on this call at the moment, please get in touch with Georgia or myself. If you'd like to participate in one of these talks, and there's going to be plenty more activity to come. So a couple of things just to keep an eye out for. Speaking of startups, the MAP Demo Day, which of course is the Melbourne Accelerator Program, that's coming up on the 17th of November, I believe, and tickets will be available for that soon. I'm sure that's going to be an online virtual extravaganza, and that'll be a great opportunity for some of the very, very early startups coming through, which will be great to see. So look, Marcello, thanks very much. I'm going to pop a quick poll for everybody that's still here on about today's event. Thanks for joining us, Marcello, and I look forward to sharing an espresso with you at the cafe on the super floor as well. And thrilled that you're able to take the time and share your story with us tonight. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. Keep an eye on the events website, and we'll be sure to be in touch with the next series of events that are coming up. Have a great night, and thanks for joining us. No one left at all. I was watching that ticker, Marcello. Everyone was absolutely engaged with every word. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time. All the best.
Thank you.